Hello everyone, and in this video I'm going to be discussing Summer Games Fest and both the Sony and Microsoft presentations. It used to be this was a big time of the year for me. I used to love watching like E3 kind of stuff, but now it's kind of grown a little stale, but I guess that means I have no expectations and therefore I don't find these events that bad. As I'm actually surprised to see the negative reaction that Sony State of Play received and that Summer Games Fest has thus far that I've seen received. Now, I used to try and watch every presentation available. Like, I used to watch the Gorilla Collection. I used to watch the Future Games Showcase. I would watch everything available, but it ends up being too much, so I only watch what I think is interesting. So for me, honestly, the shows that I've thus far found the best are the Marvelous Games Showcase and the Indie Live Expo, both of which took place in May. But if I were to talk about those, then we'd be here forever, especially if I were to highlight every game I'm interested in. So this is mostly just discussing the events as a whole and giving some of my thoughts. I'm not going to be discussing specific games necessarily. So let's begin with Summer Games Fest itself. And again, I'm kind of surprised at the negative response that this show has received, but I'm not at all surprised that it's unrelated to what was effectively a strategic article posted by Esquire beforehand, like the day before. And I also find it amusing that one of the minor points to it being the cost of having your trailer up during Summer Games Fest, that was a minor point of the Esquire article. When you read the full thing, it becomes clear that basically this one media press journalist spoke with other of their buddy press journalists in order to try and put out a piece that would pressure Geoff Keighley into talking about basically ideological matters. They wanted him to reference the layoffs, right? They wanted him to hold the companies accountable. And they also brought up the future, future kids? I don't know. How they wanted to have a political statement regarding the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. The thing is, this is a broad appeal marketing event, and that stuff's a risk to alienating your audience, which is why I actually applaud Geoff Keighley at the start of this event. At the start of it, he did address the tough times in the industry. He did address the layoffs, but he then turned around and made a positive spin on it. It was a class act. He managed to try and hold those companies accountable in their own way, but what he's really also showing is right now, we live in an incredible time where yeah, big games are going to sell big, but at the same time, all of these smaller games are selling. And even of those big games, Helldivers 2, I think, was one of those big games because the only other one was Dragon's Dogma 2. And it's not as big. The team for Helldivers 2 is not as big as some of the other games out there. So I applaud Geoff Keighley for taking the positive perspective that we are living in an era where, yes, on the giant corporate level, it is really rough, but at the same time, now is the time to compete on an indie or mid-sized level. Now, not everyone's going to make it. Some people are going to need to be indie developers while working a day job. But when you really look at Summer Games Fest, that's kind of what it is supporting. Like, it was almost a mission statement for what to expect, because a lot of the games that were on display weren't the big AAA games, which is why I think a lot of people might be having a more negative reaction.
Only these past 2 days. Then there is much to learn. The numbers are endless.
Now that cost of what it takes to have a trailer here, that is actually a big question to be asking, and it is one that I'm very curious about what other factors are at play. Because on Kotaku, of all publications, there were indie developers that came out and mentioned that for both the Game Awards and Summer Games Fest, Geoff Keighley will provide free wildcard slots, which means there are indie games that otherwise wouldn't be able to afford a slot being given one and given an opportunity to be seen by more eyes. And since more people are watching Summer Games Fest than most of the other events, like fewer people are watching Guerrilla Collective, fewer people were watching the Indie 3 or the Best Indie Expo Direct. Like, there's so many of these going on over the weekend and have been going on for like the past week that people don't watch or know about. There's still good marketing, but you don't necessarily get the same level of eyes as if they were in a Nintendo Direct, a Sony State of Play, a Microsoft presentation, or the Summer Games Fest presentation proper. However, I also think there's something that is honestly as old as E3 itself. And that is the fact that Geoff Keighley's got a lot of games hitting a lot of markets. And so people go in and they have these expectations. And maybe it's that they expect every game to appeal to them, or they go in hoping to see specific games. I have learned to have low expectations, especially when Keighley comes out and says everything's basically an already announced game. There wasn't much in the way of like new reveals going on. It was everything that was already known quantities, and this is also the beginning of the summer marketing spree. Some of these games, their marketing's already begun, such as Star Wars Outlaws, and we're going to get more of that on Monday at Ubisoft's own event, where they can take as much time as they want without having to pay Geoff Keighley any extra cash. But a lot of it is for other games like Slitterhead. They're beginning now their marketing for that game. And even as Capcom themselves mentioned, like, this is Monster Hunter Wilds going to be their first trailer, and then they're setting up Gamescom already. They're saying there's going to be more information at Gamescom and a playable demo at Gamescom. But I think it says a lot that some of the games that seem to make the biggest splash were games that were on the smaller or mid-size end. Or at the very least, even if they were on a bigger budget level, they weren't the known quantities of Sony, Microsoft, or any of the big names. At the same time, for me, I actually found the Summer Games Fest pace this year to be pretty decent. They showed a lot inside of 2 hours, and I also like I've gotten so used to many of these events trying to do that, game after game after game after game with no little, like barely a chance to get your breath. And it's a sensory overload. It is way too much on the mind at once. And in the end, like, the games start to blur together, especially for the indie scene. I mean, I do like indie games, but at some point, one, grim, Dark Souls-inspired Metroidvania side-scroller blends into the next 5. One roguelite Mega Man Metroid game blends into the next 5 that show up. The number of presentations are well-meaning, but in the end, they dilute the awareness in the player's mind. So Summer Games Fest does a decent job where after most of the reveals, there's a chance for, you have Geoff hyping it up with a little bit of conversation, or, the latest YouTuber presenter coinciding, or one of the developers involved on stage. But that's a chance for your brain to take a breath and create a partition between the last game and the next game coming up. It really does help each game stand out more and gives you a chance to mentally breathe, mentally take a break instead of the sensory overload. This is still an improvement over, say, a decade ago, where people were complaining about all of the business presentations going on stage at E3, where actually more than 10 years ago at this point, where you'd have members of Sony with all the graphs and the charts, and they're trying to outline their plans and how well they're doing. Stuff that now that I'm an adult, I'm actually very interested in, because I want to know their business strategy. I want to be able to read between the lines and figure out what it is they're really saying, like what their real plans are and what they might be hiding. Now they're just showing game, and you got to look elsewhere for that information. People, and that's the thing, like, so the people that didn't like that business presentation because they're just consumers, they're not interested in analyzing the business, they're not interested in whatever marketing mumbo jumbo they're saying, they just want the trailers. The format has shifted for them, and Summer Games Fest does a good job of mostly focusing on the game presentations with minimal interference. And this Summer Games Fest as well, I think, did a better job than prior. I do think Geoff Keighley is learning. The only real celebrity inclusion was during a paid ad for a mobile game towards the end. An awful ad. When are people going to learn Ken Jeong is not actually funny outside of the show community? But the closest thing we got to anything Hollywood related was the preview to Inside Out 2, which was tied back into games because the character on display was voiced by Yong Yeah, who is a video games YouTube content creator, as well as voice actor. To me, though, I do think there needs to be some degree on Geoff Keighley's part of better management, I guess, of some of the presentations. Like, how much did EA truly pay that, like so much money for that much of a presentation of Skate to have a bad mockery of The Office, to talk about a city that's cleared out so you can skate on it? Like, just the very concept of the ad doesn't seem to fit with the game, especially if you want to equate the ad and the game and who that game would appeal to. And that was a lot of time. So it was like, did EA just spend all of that, or was Geoff Keighley in talks with them to give them a bonus or something like that? And same with Valorant. The Valorant, like, there were like 2 or 3 trailers for Valorant, as well as the guys talking on stage. Is that just a matter of these are the guys willing to pay that much money for that much of a time slot? Or is Geoff Keighley in talks with different developers and different publishers to find out who he could get for big spotlight moments? Even so, there weren't really any cringe sketches. It was just a couple of bad ads. And of course, the bad ads came from a mobile game developer and EA, who was a big, giant publisher. Everything else was just a matter, for the most part, of are you interested in this or not? Even the Blumhouse games, right? The Blumhouse games, I was skeptical of at first, but you know, I'm not interested in most of those kinds of horror games, but they look like they're hitting the target demographics. And that first game, the first person shooter horror game, that's the one I'm actually curious about. I want to know more about. So I think if you didn't really like this Summer Games Fest, it might have to do with your own expectations, what you went in for. Of course, I do also pay attention to the, Gaming Leaks and Rumors subreddit, which on one hand, it kind of spoils all of these presentations. So if you're looking for surprises, you're not really going to get them. At the same time, it sets your expectations because you either find out about the big announcements or you find out what's not showing up. And for me, I think the days of those surprises are over anyway. I wrote about this a while ago, but at this stage, like E3 itself, some of the last surprises, and they were getting fewer and fewer back then because of the way marketing has changed. Some of the last surprises from E3, Summer Games Fest, like this stuff, have been like Devil May Cry 5. I did not expect to see that. It was a blast to see, and the game looked incredible. Metroid Dread. There were rumors of a, new side-scrolling Metroid game coming. The assumption was a Metroid Fusion remake. And instead, holy crap, Metroid Dread, it's real. They're making it. Oh my gosh, But those were also known properties. And the last big surprise reveal I remember of an unknown property, of a new IP, was Astral Chain. I remember like the look of it, the gameplay, and the music of the Astral Chain trailer. Those all just hit me, and I was like, yes, I crave this game now. Those moments are going to become more and more rare, and less you're going to see them. Oh, Game Awards. Crimson Desert, the first reveal of that. So, I mean, it still happens. So Crimson Desert was a big one. And I mean the original announcement, not the recent trailer that I'm now worried that it's too good to be true. And of course, the announcement of Dokevi by Pearl Abyss as well. And both of those, there have been rumors that they're actually scam games. So we'll have to find out one day. But my point is that most of the time, you're not going to get a surprise at one of these events unless it's from a smaller developer anyway. The bigger publishers and the bigger studios want to save those announcements for their own time, so you're either going to get them before or you're going to get them in a different kind of a direct, and it all depends on how secure they are from leakers, which these days, there's an awful lot of good, accurate leaks and leakers right now. But that's the thing, just because there's a lack of surprises doesn't mean these events aren't that bad. It's not what it used to be. And I think for a lot of people, it's like, this needs to just be a fun thing to watch and see if there's anything that piques your interest. But you got to be ready, and I think it's best to watch it with friends. That way, if something's boring everybody, you can just talk through it, or you get the perspective of somebody else. Like, I have a friend that I watched it with that is huge into the fighting game scene. So, on one hand, seeing Terry and Mai Shiranui in Street Fighter 6 was a surprise. But because he's big into like the FGC and all that stuff, his reaction was huge. And he was immediately going to his Discord, his FGC Discord, to see how his friends there were reacting. So I got to experience a bit of excitement through him, even though personally I do not have Street Fighter 6 still, and I'm not big into fighting games like he is. So watching with friends is probably one of the best things you could do, or go into a Discord and watch with a bunch of people from there if you don't have friends in real life that you can watch with. Because I'm always up for seeing games through other people's eyes. Like, I don't play Kingdom Hearts, but I've watched a lot of videos about Kingdom Hearts because I'm fascinated in what people think about Kingdom Hearts, like why people like it. And in turn, I learn more about what other people are interested in games. But for me personally, like even some of the games that I am interested in, like Black Myth Wukong got a cinematic trailer, and it's like, well, I know we've already seen gameplay, but where's the gameplay? Anyway, to wrap this part of the video up, I didn't think Summer Games Festival was that bad, the main presentation. I didn't stick around much for Day of the Devs from what I've seen. Those aren't my kind of indies. Again, look at the Indie Live Expo list of Japanese indie games or otherwise Asian territory indie games. Those are far more my speed. And I haven't watched Devolver Digital yet as of this recording. I have mixed feelings about their presentations. Like, I like them and I hate them at the same time. But, like, again, Summer Game Fest is, like, the big one that the most eyes are going to be locked in on. And I think it was fine. I don't think it was bad. I don't think it was great either. But I think it was fine for what it is. But one of the things that I think more people need to understand is this is the beginning of the marketing season. And a lot of the biggest boys that the average number of consumers are going to be interested in, they're doing their own events or they're waiting for their own time slots. That way you don't have to pay all that money to Keighley. You give the taste, and then whoever, is now interested and curious comes to you later where you don't have to pay extra money to show. A perfect example is Atlas had an event last night after Summer Games Fest where they spent 22 minutes detailing the gameplay of Metaphor Refantatio. And it was informative. I liked watching that 22-minute presentation. But that's the reality here, right? They're going to give you enough to make you curious, and then they're going to do their really deep dives elsewhere where they don't have to pay anybody money, except maybe a venue. Regarding Geoff Keighley himself, though, because every once in a while I feel like there's attempts to character assassinate him, people dislike him. There are aspects of him I can criticize regarding how he runs his show, but through the years of seeing different, interviews with him, seeing different things, he does seem like a nice guy. He needs more hard-hitting questions, especially because I think he can take it. I think he can deal with it. So I still think Geoff Keighley has some issues with how he runs these shows. The whole celebrity thing, that's either a misunderstanding to what he needs for broad appeal, a misunderstanding to what the video game audience is today, or part of that old-fashioned, I want my parents to approve of my hobby too, which, I'm going to be 40 soon. He's older than me. If I'm over that, why isn't he? But we'll see. Again, Summer Game Fest, not that bad. I think it was fine. The notion of Geoff Keighley being the voice of gamers is kind of silly, but you could do a lot worse, honestly. He's not bad for what he does. That's Summer Games Fest. Now, even though it took place before, let's talk about Sony's State of Play, because we actually got something from Summer Game Fest that is going to contribute to some of what I want to say about this. A lot of times I like to watch these sort of events to see what is that company trying to do. Nintendo's is predictable. Nintendo is a toy company in the business of making video games. So you know what to expect with Nintendo because what you're going to get is a playset. You're going to get some version of fun. Something that's going to emphasize the mechanics over the story. Even for series like Fire Emblem, Nintendo is the most predictable because their underlying philosophy has not changed for decades. Some of their methods have changed, some of the way they try and deliver on that philosophy has, but Nintendo is Nintendo. It's Sony and Microsoft that change, even if they have some similar aspects to themselves as well. For example, ever since the original PlayStation, Sony's been trying to push cinematics and everything, which makes this era the most unusual in that they're instead chasing the live service trend. Now, enough people have talked about Concord, but I think it demonstrates something interesting in how they're trying to approach it. They are chasing a trend, but you can tell they're clearly trying to also do it with a bit more, I don't want to say intelligence or finesse than other competitors, but they clearly want each of these live service games to have a different market appeal. So Concord is their Overwatch at home. It looks bland and uninteresting, and it lacks lore. There's a number of elements that I think people enjoy these kinds of hero shooters for. Mechanics are definitely important. In fact, mechanics might be the most important reason why Apex Legends is so successful, because I don't know if I see it being character designs, but I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Lore is another one, and Apex Legends does have lore for each of those characters. They all have backgrounds and histories. But Overwatch really set that stage up, right? Mug Thief made a good point when he talked about the Overwatch trailer, like the announcement for the Overwatch trailer that was all cinematic, and noting how he's curious about the characters because of how they present it. And what they do is they give you the view of someone looking, someone from the outside, not one of the main characters. You're getting someone from the outside, like a teenager and his little brother. One of them, looks back at this age of heroes, their heroic league of Overwatch. And the other one is more dejected because they're no longer that. They've disbanded. And that automatically gets you curious in the setting, which it gets you interested in the lore, because then the characters show up and they're being heroic. And then some of the villainous characters are being charismatically villainous. And you get all of their different varying character designs that are aesthetically pleasing, and it's interesting. And also that stylization, Blizzard learned from World of Warcraft, that stylization means you can run off of more hardware. Concord, on the other hand, has a cinematic trailer that doesn't tell you anything about the world, and all you get about the characters is that they are discount Guardians of the Galaxy. They're clearly trying to give something of the same vibe to get you interested, but all that means is, oh, that's Peter Quill, but he's got scaly skin. That's Drax, but he's got fur. That's not a good way to get people interested in your setting or your lore, and the gameplay similarly seemed uninspired. Valorant, at least, is let's take Overwatch but combine it with Counter-Strike, as well as having all of the background of League of Legends characters. So that had that advantage in competing with Overwatch because it was setting itself apart while being similar. Concord has honestly gorgeous looking environments, at least. The level design is more interesting than the character design to me, but it's still failing to meet the mark. It still looks like, so it's basically Overwatch, but realistic graphics, which shows, again, Sony focusing on hyper-realism because they're Sony. They're trying to sell their console, and one of the ways you sell your console is you convince everyone it's prettier than the competition and it's prettier than the last generation. But this means on PC, you're probably not going to be running on as many systems. So you get a sense of the trend where, Sony wants different kinds of live service games, so they're not being as cannibalistic as I originally thought. When you hear like 10 to 12 live service games being in development, like one of them is MLB The Show. Well, MLB The Show is a very specific demographic. It's not going to be competing with Concord. So there's a degree of intelligence there, but everything else is, it's fitting. We're going to chase a trend. What can we imitate? What can we copy? Which is, from the people that brought you the PlayStation Move, which was, hey, let's do the Wii Motion Control too. At least Microsoft tried to do something a little different by getting rid of the controller altogether. And what's most bizarre is they said no major first-party games before March of 2025. Well, what is Astrobot? And if you say a game like Astrobot can't sell as much as like their other big games, I'm sorry, have you seen Nintendo's sales for Mario games? Astrobot looks like former Nintendo employees joined Team Asobi and helped make this game. It has Nintendo fun stamped all over it. Astrobot was a great last game to have because it's the only game that they showed that could leave that kind of a positive taste in your mouth. Because it looks good and it's an actual first party. It is not them paying third parties for exclusive DLC or some other advantage, or giving third parties a discount for marketing to pretend, hey, we've got Japanese games too, even though they're all going to be available on PC or in some cases Xbox or even Nintendo Switch. They spent the most time on Concord trying to sell that, less time on Astrobot, and Astrobot's the one that is probably poised to do the best, because if you have kids and you have a PlayStation 5, that game is it's a no-brainer. And even if you're an adult, adults play Mario. I played Super Mario Bros. Wonder. It was great. All of my friends, most of whom have no kids, played Super Mario Bros. Wonder. It was great. Astrobot can sell a lot. And speaking of sales numbers, so the first thing in Summer Games Fest was Lego Horizon, and it feels like Sony is trying to make fetch happen. Now, Horizon doesn't sell poorly. Horizon Forbidden West, which remember was on both PS4 and PS5, sold 8.4 million units between February 2022 and April 2023. So, a year and 2 months. God of War Ragnarok surpassed that in 10 weeks with 11 million units sold, and hit 15 million after a year, which is nearly double what it took for Horizon to get in a roughly span of time. Spider-Man 2 hit 11 million in 6 months. And that one, unlike Ragnarok and Forbidden West, was only on PS5. Sony has this weird insistence on trying to poise Aloy like she's going to be the mascot for Sony. And part of me wonders if this is Herman Holst's own ego, because he's formerly from Guerrilla. I mean, I can't understand any other reason you would try and push Aloy and the Horizon series this hard. Even amongst Sony fans, I feel like Horizon, like you have God of War, Spider-Man, Last of Us, like she comes in fourth at best of their first party offerings. And I did watch some people whose reactions were like, why so much Horizon? Why not more Bloodborne? Because Bloodborne never sold as much as these other games did. That's why you're not going to get another Bloodborne. We're going to be lucky if we get a remaster. We probably aren't. And even if we get a remake, well, just look up some of the comparisons people make between the Demon Souls original and the remake. It won't be what people want. But it blows my mind that they try this hard with Horizon when it is so unproven compared to... And that's the thing. That's not a number to laugh at. I'm just saying Spider-Man and Kratos are far better poised to be mascots for your platform than Aloy is. Admittedly, this might be some bias. I did play Horizon Zero Dawn on the PS4. I liked some of the combat. I liked some of the environmental navigation. But for the most part, I hated the story. I thought the story and the world were awful and dumb. I hated combat with other humans, and the open world itself, it was another open world game. But I also think there's something very curious, because MLB The Show is on Xbox because probably the MLB wanting to sell more units, right? I mean, that's a license deal with baseball, and do they want console exclusivity? I mean, that's my best guess as to why MLB The Show is multi-platform. And they're releasing games on PC. But Lego Horizon appearing on the Nintendo Switch, that was a weird surprise to see. And I'm curious if there's anything to speculate about that, because that was unexpected, and I'm not sure, I'm just not sure what to make of it. I mean, it might be something minor, but is it indicative of Sony themselves having to deal with similar issues, even being the market share winner, as Microsoft, who is now looking to sell more of their games on the PlayStation? So that's got me curious. That's got me really curious. But I don't really have anything else to say about Sony's state of play and their strategies. But I don't know. Sony is in a very confusing space for me, and I guess we'll just have to see, because they're the victor by default at this point. People bought the PS5 just because they were going to buy the PS5, and chances are if they ever do a PS6, then people buy a PS6 to buy a PS6, because that's just what people are like. But I feel like they're both realizing the live service strategy is not going to work as well as they had hoped, while simultaneously just, I don't know, like their future philosophy and plans are indecipherable. So I guess we'll just have to see. Oh, and then of course there is the single player games requiring the PSN login, which, I mean, good luck with that. I was going to get God of War Ragnarok on PC so I could play it at a good frame rate, but I'm getting it. If I'm getting it on Steam, I don't want another login. And it's not even multiplayer. So, I mean, they've basically come out and said both that it's that it is for control. It's for fluffing the numbers of PSN active users to shareholders. They want to be able to ban whoever from any of their games from the PSN platform rather than just an individual ban on the individual game on Steam. It's control, and it is a foolish move. All right, so the Microsoft event happened, and well, I guess first let's just start with the response to it. People have been positive on this. For a lot of people, it seems like they saved Summer Games Fest weekend. To the point that it feels like everyone already forgot about the Tango Gameworks and Arcane Austin shutdowns. I'm not surprised. I mean, there was evidently an IGN series of interviews where they asked questions, Phil Spencer gave non-answers, and the crowd applauded. The games industry is notoriously short of memory, so it doesn't surprise me people would be so willing to applaud Xbox despite having been yelling about them for the past several months. Consumer gonna consume. To which point, he wasn't the only one that made the comment, but one user, Darn Thread, noted in my Farewell Xbox video, "You'll be back once the showcase on June 9th is over." Yeah, about that. I was actually surprised at how much was first party. I was expecting the majority of this to be third party games, but Microsoft wanted to make sure you knew they had a lot coming in 2025. And that's the part that, again, it still feels like too little too late for me. They might have a lot coming, but one, not all of it looks all that great. And two, I mean, what do you got for me this year? For some people, Avowed and Indiana Jones is likely going to be enough. But to me, there's only 3 Indiana Jones movies, and that's fine, much like Star Wars. I'm not interested in playing a game that's looks almost like it's a redo of Dial of Destiny in some ways. And Avowed, I mean, I don't play Elder Scrolls games, and while Avowed isn't going to be the same thing, first-person fantasy combat like that, it doesn't look like it's my style. In fact, the one first-party game that had my interest the most was Doom Dark Ages. Now, there's 2 things about that, in that, one, I'm still cautious because Doom Eternal I wasn't as fond of. I really liked Doom 2016, but I did not care for Doom Eternal so much. They were very specific in how they wanted you to play, and while I don't think I was bad at the game, I got sick of feeling like I could not get good at the game, if that makes any sense. It was a very particular system, and I wasn't fond of it. However, Doom the Dark Ages doesn't look like it's trying to play like Doom Eternal did, so I'll be keeping my eye on that, and not even just releasing on PC though, that one's already confirmed for PS5. So, again, if you're talking about a reason for me to, again, I'll be back once the showcase is over, why? The one game I'm actually really interested in is available for everything else, except Nintendo. And let's face it, considering the ports of Doom 2016 and Eternal to the Nintendo Switch, we'll probably see Dark Ages on Switch too. Now, there were other games that looked interesting, like South of Midnight, but I'm not sold yet, and again, it's like there's so much else that looks more interesting. If anything, the 2 games that interested me the most are both third party, in that they were Expedition 33, which, I mean, me and my friends, this Twitter meme that went around, that was us. I mean, I actually thought the environments looked beautiful, but that, sitting forward once the turn-based combat kicked in, yeah, that was us. But in addition to that, Wushang looked like it could be interesting, but I need to see more on that as well. And even then, once again, they're both 2025 games. So when it comes to this year, even in the third parties, there wasn't really anything for me, but that's just me. I do understand, though, why so many people perceived this to be such a good presentation. Microsoft came out the gate and they had a shotgun full of titles whose spread hit as wide an audience as possible. There were, of course, some things lacking. There wasn't really anything for platformer fans, for example. But they had a little bit of something for everyone, and that's the best choice here. And again, so did Summer Games Fest itself. But I also think this had surprises. Let's be honest, this actually had surprises. It had reveals that were not leaked ahead of time. Like, everyone knew about Doom Dark Ages, that had been leaked quite a bit. People knew that was coming, and some other games people knew were coming. But there was a lot of stuff here that was unknown. Again, Expedition 33. There's a reason that game surprised everyone. But who's going to try and leak a new IP, right? Summer Games Fest, on the other hand, was not only known quantities, but they were of only a set level of budget. There wasn't a lot that was like this high compared to everything that was mid or below. And as much as people love indies, as much as people love all these different games, if you want to get as broad appeal as possible, it's an unfortunate thing, but you do need games that look like they have an impressive budget these days. Not always, like there was that mixtape, but mixtape is not only just the look of it, it's the style of game that you're getting a limited audience anyway. But again, you're hitting as many people as possible, and a game like that is going to hit the wholesome games crowd. The new Life is Strange is going to hit the Games for Impact crowd, we'll call it. So people felt good, and Microsoft basically wanted to come out and say, yes, for the next 2 years, we do have first-party games for you. All that investment has finally paid off, 6 years later? 5, 6 years later? It was supposed to start last year, but again, aside from Hi-Fi Rush, neither Redfall or Starfield made the splash they wanted. Hellblade 2 it released. I don't hear many people talking about it besides how good it looks. I have a friend that's played it, likes it, but even they're not talking about it that much. So for Microsoft's part, hopefully Avowed and Indiana Jones do well for them. For me, though, the things that I was most amused by was hitting the ground running with Call of Duty, which makes sense. You want to deliver to that audience first because there's a lot of Call of Duty players and they're all fans of Black Ops for the most part. So this is going to be right up their alley. It's going to be a crowd pleaser for them, and it's going to get them in a good mood. And for everyone else, you get it out of the way. Here's your Call of Duty. Stick around for more after the show. Now you can forget about it if you don't like Call of Duty, and if you like Call of Duty, well, now you're bookended with your favorite thing. But what Phil said regarding the parody, right? Regarding platform parity. He made a point that it's the first time Call of Duty appeared in their show for 10 years, and he didn't explicitly state why, but he made sure to say all beta access, DLC, all the content will be the same on all platforms. And he talked about it as choice. Now, here's the thing about that. Keep in mind, during the whole Federal Trade Commission and all that legal battle, the biggest concern for many people was the potential exclusivity of Call of Duty. And that was what Sony hinged their argument on. So even though technically Microsoft already went back on their word for some of their Bethesda-type acquisition stuff, they really don't want to go back on their word for this. They're going to want to be honest and true and do that platform parity. Now, recently in an interview, Phil Spencer also referred to slimy console tactics. Again, he never calls out PlayStation specifically, but we know what it is. But the funny thing about all this, where people are applauding Phil for this, is Xbox did it first. Or at least when it comes to Call of Duty, Xbox did it first. There's been, retail exclusivity for pre-order bonuses and stuff like that. There's been other kinds of console exclusives in regards to games as a whole, but it was Xbox that used to get the exclusive DLC or access or something. And it was Microsoft that was always getting the exclusive showcases of Call of Duty on the Xbox 360 during E3. And now they're calling Sony slimy about it. It's a manipulative tactic in order to try and dress it up like this, as if they're the good guy, when the reality of the situation is they can't do it without looking like the bad guy. Because that would show them to be liars, first of all. And PlayStation just took over their strategy when PS4 oversold Xbox. So there's a bit of honesty worded in a way as to be manipulative of your emotions and your judgment. Same case with Sarah Bond talking about games preservation. And a lot of people have already pointed this out. But you just announced an all-digital Series X and you're talking about games preservation, right? Proper games preservation includes physical copies of media, as well as removing online requirements, which many of the games announced at that show require. So really, in the end, though, this was a victory lap for Microsoft because Xbox got to finally show what all of their first parties they bought are working on. Enough so that everyone forgot that if South of Midnight doesn't do well, then guess what? Compulsion Games themselves might be no more. But it also doesn't really matter because if you like one of their games and you buy it on Steam, or if they're releasing it on PlayStation and you buy it there, they're still winning. They're still making cash. I mean, the hardware game is nothing but a loss at this point. And if they can get you in their Game Pass ecosystem, used to playing all of these games through Game Pass, and so even if you don't get another Xbox, you want to find a device where you can get Game Pass, they've got you hook, line, and sinker. As for me, that'll about do it. I'm hoping to have a stream this Saturday. Might have some guests on, we'll have to see. If I have guests, then we'll all talk about what we enjoyed at Summer Games Fest. If it's just me, then I might go over some of the longer presentations because I got thoughts on things like the Dragon Age Veilguard reveal and some of the Kanitsugami previews that I've seen. Unfortunately, the Darksiders 3 video has had a bit of a delay in its editing for this video and other reasons, but I'll be talking on that in the near future. So thank you for watching. That's all from me for now, and I hope to see you again. Bye.